I'd like to show you another game in my series, Fabiano Caruana's Top 10 Attacks. This was played when Caruana was 20 years old, and already he was establishing himself in the world's elite. It was played in the Grand Slam final, played in Sao Paulo and Bilbao, and it's against Sergei Karjakin. In fact, Caruana won this tournament together with Magnus Carlsen, which just shows how far he'd come by this stage. So, without further ado, let's take a look at the game. Karjakin with white opens with his customary e4. And Caruana plays a very regular opening. He's prepared to face the Spanish, but he doesn't go for one of the old main lines with bishop e7. He plays this early b5 and then stations his bishop actively on c5. Now this can lead to incredibly complicated positions. It's quite popular over the last sort of 15-20 years. But it's very risky for black. You really have to know what you're doing, because obviously you invite white to press forward in the center with d4, as usual in the Spanish, but black loses some time. And one of the most popular lines here is to play with a4 to weaken the b5 pawn. But Karjakin played bishop e3, so it's more regular, more steady. Now don't forget, taking that pawn in the middle, not too good. A very typical trap. Bishop d5, attacks two knights, castles from Caruana. So both sides developing very regularly. Bishop b7. Well, those bishops are stationed really actively here. And for that reason, you might think that d5 would be kind of a normal move in this position to lock out that bishop on b7. And, well, I think that's quite a reasonable way for white to play. I suppose it does give black security as well, because we have this fixed pawn structure in the middle of the board. And black can try and get in, maybe knight c4 at some point, maybe b4. And this bishop is going to come back into the game via c8. But that's another way for white to play. Instead, Karjakin plays rook e1, supporting the bishop, and of course indirectly the pawn on e4 as well. And here pawn to h6 is actually the most popular move, but Caruana makes, well, a very risky decision actually. He decides to give up his pawn on e5, or give up this strong point on e5, and play knight b4. So white has a nice center, but black is attacking it, and that knight threatens to come in on d3. So this is tricky stuff. Queen e2 played by Karjakin. Now it's possible to take that pawn on e4, but I have a feeling that's the kind of position that Karjakin would really like. Here's the trick. He played bishop d2, attacking the knight on b4, also attacking the bishop. So black would have to play bishop takes knight. Black is still a pawn up here. Now either a5 or c5, let's say c5. And I think white has some compensation here, perhaps just queen g3. I think it's the kind of position that Karjakin would love. Very regular pieces. Perhaps rook comes in the middle. Bishop might come to h6 or maybe g5. There's, quite decent compensation for the pawn. But that clearly wasn't Caruana's intention. He played c5. So putting pressure on white's center. And if the pawn advances to d5, then c4 is very annoying, attacking the bishop, and the knight will come in here. So first of all, a3 pushes the knight back. And white has quite a big decision here. You can play something like this and e5. and the knight comes into g4. But of course, this is again very, very complicated. With both sides have their trumps here. Obviously, that pawn could advance at some point. This queenside majority is very interesting as well. But Karjakin just kind of calms it down a bit. I think an understandable move. He plays d5. And now we have a kind of Benoni pawn structure, except the pieces are rather differently placed. So you can see this pawn here, supported by the e-pawn, does a good job of blocking out this bishop on b7. That's a problem for black. This knight on e7 also, just for a moment, isn't very well placed. And I think this would be a good moment for white to try and strike on the queen side and to play a4 to try and loosen those queenside pawns while black's minor pieces perhaps aren't so well placed. Instead, Karjakin played h3, and I think that was a bit too slow, because after these moves, rook e8 opposite the queen, always tactically interesting when you have that. And then knight g6. I think black had started to stabilize the position, and I think, yeah, Caruana could be optimistic from this moment on, because certainly white is definitely not getting in this e5 break, and from this moment there is potentially nice pressure on that pawn on e4. But Karjakin continues steadily. He has a plan too. b3. Now that stops the c-pawn advancing, but it also weakens the c3 square, so that bishop hops in. So the rook is coming over to hit the bishop, so therefore b4 supports the bishop. And here I think Karjakin makes a really poor decision. He closes the queenside with a4. I think he should have exchanged. Now if pawn takes, then white will be able to use the d4 square at some moment for a knight. So bishop takes, and then bishop d3, and possibly moving the rook to a1. Maybe at some point you might be able to use the c4 square. I mean, I think this is just a very balanced position. Both sides have reasonable play here, but I think that's definitely the way for white to go. Instead, Karjakin, as I said, he closed the position with a4, and here is where things really turn in black's favour. Well, first of all, a5 prepares bishop a6, so that bishop finally wants to get into the game. Therefore bishop d3, that makes sense. And there are a lot of ways for black to play this, but Caruana's next move shows real class. He actually appreciates it's not necessary to hurry in this position. h6 might prepare the knight dropping back here, and then possibly the queen moving over. That's one idea. It might be he plays knight h5 and doesn't want to allow bishop g5. But it's also just saying to white, okay, what are you doing here? I mean, h6 is a useful little preparatory move, and later on there are no back rank problems. But white is struggling to find any really decent move here. You can see those rooks are kind of on the wrong side of the board. But with the bishop on c3, you don't want to station it on e1 anyway. And here, I think Karjakin, somehow he started going downhill. He played queen d1. Now, understandably, he wanted to move the queen away from any potential problems on the e-file. But that allowed bishop a6. And once these bishops are exchanged, then you can see there are going to be permanent problems with the pawn on e4. That's very unpleasant. So Karjakin felt he had to keep that bishop, but then, well, ceding the diagonal like this doesn't look good, and that makes life even more difficult for white's major pieces which are just stuck on the wrong side of the board. It reminds me of a Chess 960 game, actually, where somehow these major pieces have found themselves in very poor positions. Black's pieces, on the other hand, coordinate extremely well. Rook a7, beautiful move. King h2, I think indicative of White's problems. Hasn't really got a clear plan, and that rook swings over to attack the pawn on e4. And here, well, I'm not sure g4 is a good move because it starts to open up White's king. I mean, it really looks desperate to me, but I have to say it's very hard to find a decent suggestion. Caruana seizes the opportunity to take on e4, sacrificing the exchange. Once again, we see that this is a sacrifice that comes out of very logical play by Caruana. He's built up his position beautifully. The pawn structure is regular. The pieces coordinate extremely well. You know, there's nothing actually very speculative about this sacrifice. You know, just on a purely material basis, you could say, well, on a numerical basis, White is 1 point up. Black has a bishop and a pawn against a rook. But when you consider these two bishops, when you consider the fact that this pawn is weak, that Black has the possibility to get his queenside majority in motion, that White's king is now weak, then this hardly looks like a sacrifice to me. White has very few options here, or simply no good options. Well, what happens if he tries to exchange pieces? Well, after we exchange, queen takes runs into rook e2, f2 drops. Knight takes runs into rook e2 anyway, followed by queen out somewhere along here. What about knight d2? Well, that will run into another exchange sacrifice. And then the queen comes into the game. It looks pretty bad. Queen c2 played, attacking the rook, which was supported by the queen. Rook g1. So this is a desperate attempt to bring pieces back towards the king side to support the king, but it's too late. Black has many good moves here. This one I mentioned before, just establishing a strong pass b pawn, but Caruana goes for the kill and gives up another exchange, and this is really nice. Everything works so beautifully. You just have to see that these pieces, and of course the queen, stream into White's position. There is absolutely no defense. Those bishops cover these crucial squares that the rooks would like to move to, and there really is no decent defense here. Karjakin plays rook f1, hoping that he'll be able to get rid of one of those bishops, but no, here's a really lovely move. Bishop e2. The bishops are stronger than the rooks here. Just wants to take this knight. Queen f5. Supporting the knight and perhaps desperately hoping for a little bit of counterplay, but no. Bishop d3, really nice. Pushing the queen away. And perhaps that bishop will come here, perhaps looking to give a check here. Queen d7. Bishop e5 check. Now, if that's taken, let's see what happens. Check to the king. If rook g3, well, we could just take rook. King here. Check. King is caught in the corner. Rook up. Knight f4. And White has absolutely no defense here. Let me just show you a... Okay, this is a long variation, but it's also a strong variation. Let me just show you how things might end. And here is a beautiful move. Queen f3. Threatening, of course, queen takes rook. And when the rook moves away, you can give checks and that wins, but I like g5 actually. Giving the king some room, but also the chief point is that it covers these squares. So black threatens. I'm just going to show it to you here. Check. And you can see the g5 pawn covers those squares. And let's go to mate, because we always like a checkmate. There we are. Checkmate. Lovely stuff. Of course, white could defend in other ways, but it just shows he is utterly lost in this position. After bishop e5 check, the king dropped. Bishop e4. Wow, look at those pieces. Look at those bishops cutting down across the king. A check. That was blocked. And that was the last move of the game. Black wins here with queen e2 check. If rook f2, then that's checkmate. And if king h1, then queen h2 is another very attractive checkmate. Fantastic stuff. Just love the way Caruana's pieces coordinate so well, and as I said, very, very typical of the way that he likes to play chess. Well, do remember to check out the entire playlist. You'll find the link up there. There are quite a few games already there. Not the full 10. Well, I'll come to that soon. And do check out Magnus Carlsen's top 10 finishes. And again, you'll find the link up there. And do let me know, what do you think is Caruana's best attacking game? Maybe I haven't even got to it yet. Which is your favourite of the ones that I've shown so far? Thanks for watching.